It was a day like no other on Capitol Hill, where the air seemed to crackle with anticipation. Inside a packed congressional hearing room, the stakes had never been higher. The committee was convened to discuss the latest round of intelligence leaks that had rocked Washington. The room was filled with lawmakers, staffers, journalists, and, of course, the power players, the people whose voices mattered most. Kash Patel, the former counterterrorism advisor and a firebrand in conservative circles, stood ready for his moment in the spotlight. He was known for his sharp tongue, no-nonsense approach, and unyielding stance on national security. His reputation had grown in recent years, as he had become a key player in the fight against what he called the deep state. Now, he was about to square off with one of the loudest voices on the left, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Crockett, a fiery representative from Texas, had quickly made a name for herself as an outspoken critic of the Trump administration's policies and a fierce advocate for reform. She was known for her impassioned speeches and her ability to rally her base, but today, there was a different energy in the room. The tension was palpable. There was an undeniable clash of ideologies on the horizon. As the hearing began, Patel took his seat with a quiet confidence. Crockett, on the other hand, was animated, flipping through her papers and preparing for her line of questioning. She was determined to get under Patel's skin, to expose what she saw as the hypocrisy and failure of the people who had served in the previous administration. "Mr. Patel," Crockett began, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "you've spent years claiming to be a defender of the truth, but what have you really done to protect this country? The American people deserve answers, not more of your partisan games." Patel didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his voice steady and controlled. "I'm not here to play games, Congresswoman," he shot back. "I'm here to make sure the American people understand who's really been putting their interests first, and it's not the politicians who use their position to score political points." The room fell silent. There was an undeniable sense that something big was about to unfold. Crockett's eyes narrowed as she prepared to make her next move. The verbal sparring had only just begun. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett wasn't one to back down, and she wasn't about to let Patel's sharp response slide. With a flourish, she launched into her next question, her tone rising with the intensity of her words. "Mr. Patel," she began, "let's talk about accountability. You've been part of an administration that mishandled almost every critical decision, from national security to the pandemic. You've been part of a circus, and now you're trying to sell yourself as the hero. If you care so much about protecting this country, why didn't you do something when it mattered?" Patel's face hardened, but his expression remained calm. He'd been in this position before, facing relentless attacks designed to make him stumble. But he knew exactly how to respond. Leaning back slightly in his chair, he gave Crockett a look that seemed to say, "Go ahead, try me. I've spent my entire career working behind the scenes, making tough decisions that people like you couldn't even begin to understand," Patel replied, his voice unwavering. "I've never been a politician, Congresswoman. I don't need to play to the cameras or cater to political donors. I've always put national security first. But you," he paused, looking directly at her with a gaze that felt like it could pierce through steel. "You're more concerned with political theater than protecting the country. This isn't a game, and it's time we stopped pretending it is." The room went still, and even some of the lawmakers on Crockett's side exchanged glances. Patel's words hit hard, cutting through the usual political posturing. But Crockett wasn't one to let a challenge go unanswered. She leaned forward, her voice almost a growl. "Oh, please, Kash," she snapped. "Don't talk to me about patriotism when you were part of an administration that actively undermined the very institutions that keep this country safe. You were complicit in creating the chaos we're dealing with now. And now, you have the audacity to lecture us? To lecture me? The American people are watching, and they're tired of the circus you and your cronies have created." For a brief moment, Patel's eyes narrowed, and he stood, his posture rigid. The tension in the room became unbearable, every word hanging in the air like a threat. He had had enough of the games. "Enough," he said firmly. "You want a circus? You've got one. But don't mistake me for the clown. This is where the circus ends, Congresswoman. It's time for the truth to come out, and I'm the one who's going to make sure it does. The room held its breath. This wasn't just a verbal clash, it was a battle of ideals. And in that moment it was clear that Kash Patel wasn't going to let Crockett or anyone else derail the truth. The moment was thick with anticipation, and the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Crockett, her face flushed with fury, opened her mouth to retort, but Patel was already moving forward. His words, precise and deliberate, cut through her attempt to regain control of the narrative. Congresswoman, Patel continued, his voice steady but intense, you've spent years attacking the people who actually did the work. The people who kept this country safe while you played to your base, scoring cheap political points. You may not like the truth, but it's time to face it. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before he took the next step. Patel glanced over at the committee chair, who gave a subtle nod, giving him permission to proceed. Patel placed a folder on the table in front of him, thick with documents. He opened it slowly, making sure every eye in the room was on him. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on anyone. He was about to drop something big. These, he said, tapping the folder with his finger, are the declassified intelligence reports you've been asking about, Congresswoman. The very ones you've been accusing me of withholding. His eyes locked with Crockett's, and his voice dropped to a near whisper. These reports prove exactly how dangerous your grandstanding has been. You've been playing politics with national security, and now the truth is about to come out. There was an audible gasp from some of the committee members. Crockett's expression flickered. Was it fear? Shock? She quickly masked it with a forced smile, but it didn't fool anyone. The room had shifted. Now, everyone wanted to know what Patel had in those documents. I'm not the one who's been covering up, Congresswoman, Patel continued, his confidence growing. You think this is all about a few political games? You think I'm here to play to the press and pretend everything's fine? Well, I've got news for you. The American people deserve better than that. Crockett, now visibly rattled, tried to regain her composure. What exactly are you implying, Mr. Patel? She demanded, her voice shaky but still full of defiance. What exactly are you trying to distract us from? Patel smirked, knowing he had the upper hand. I'm not trying to distract you from anything. I'm trying to make you understand how deep the lies go. How much damage has been done by people like you who are more interested in playing to your donors than securing this country. With a swift motion, he pulled a few papers from the folder and held them up for the committee to see. These documents prove the coordinated efforts to manipulate public opinion during key intelligence operations. You, Congresswoman Crockett, have been a willing participant in spreading misinformation. Crockett recoiled, her face pale. She could feel the room turning against her. The chair of the committee shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and a few members leaned forward, eager for more details. You've painted me as a villain for years, Patel said, his voice growing even more commanding. But the real villain is the one who ignores the truth when it's inconvenient. And the truth is, you've been part of the circus that's been distracting the public from the real threats. For a moment, Crockett stood silent, processing the magnitude of what was happening. The circus she had so expertly crafted, the narrative that had made her a rising star, was collapsing. All because of Kash Patel. The room was now an electric mix of whispers and murmurs. The weight of the accusation was sinking in. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room was fixed on the unfolding drama, and no one dared to speak. Patel's words hung in the air, his accusations rattling everyone in the room, but it was Crockett who seemed most affected. Her hands gripped the edges of the table, knuckles white, as she struggled to find her next words. The shift in power was palpable, she could feel it. Patel stood tall, his posture exuding confidence. He had dropped the bomb, and there was no taking it back. But it wasn't just the committee members who were watching. The cameras in the room were rolling, the media representatives hanging on every word. This was the kind of moment that defined careers, one that could make or break a politician. Crockett finally opened her mouth, her voice hoarse with indignation. "You're a liar, Patel," she spat, though there was a hint of uncertainty beneath her anger. "You're trying to destroy my credibility with nothing but a stack of papers. These documents mean nothing, just more of your manufactured nonsense. I know exactly what you're doing, and it won't work." But Patel didn't flinch. He had anticipated her deflection, her attempt to undermine the evidence with bluster. He had expected it. He was prepared. "Oh, I'm sorry, Congresswoman," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Did I miss the part where you had an intelligence career? Because what you're looking at, what's in these documents, is the result of years of painstaking work by professionals, people who understand national security. People who are willing to stand up to political manipulation." He turned toward the committee chair, who was now looking at the situation with a mix of surprise and concern. "I'm not here to make wild accusations," Patel continued. "I'm here to show you the facts. The truth. And frankly, the truth is something you and your colleagues have been avoiding for far too long." The room remained tense, the members still processing what they had just heard. A few whispered to each other, their expressions a mix of disbelief and growing concern. Some seemed to be on Patel's side, while others appeared to be leaning toward Crockett's defense. But even her most steadfast supporters were beginning to doubt. Crockett stood there, seething, but she knew she couldn't keep up the act much longer. Her own party was watching her, and the last thing she needed was for them to see her crumble in front of her opponent. She glanced at the media cameras, knowing that this would be replayed across the country in a matter of hours. Trying to regain control, she spoke again, her voice shakier this time. "You think this is over, Patel? You think you've won? Let me remind you, I didn't rise to where I am by backing down. And neither will the American people. You can sit there and talk about your deep state fantasies all day, but at the end of the day, I am the one who fights for real change." Patel didn't even react to her rant. Instead, he simply let her words hang in the air before delivering the final blow. "Change, Congresswoman? You think you're the one fighting for change? The truth is, you're part of the system that has been failing this country for decades. You've spent so much time pointing fingers that you forgot to look at what's really happening." The committee chair cleared his throat and finally spoke, his voice a bit more measured now. "We're getting off topic here. We're supposed to be discussing national security, not political squabbles. Let's keep this focused." But even he knew this moment had already escalated beyond the usual committee proceedings. Crockett's face flushed with fury, but Patel had already seized the momentum. His words were out, and the damage was done. She couldn't deny the reality of what had just been exposed. She had tried to turn this into a fight for the American people, but Patel had shown that she was the one playing games. A realization slowly crept over her, she wasn't just losing the battle. She was losing her grip on everything she had worked for. As the session broke for a brief recess, the members of the committee scattered. Some remained in their seats, discussing the fallout of what had just transpired, while others headed for the exits, their faces grim. Patel, however, remained seated, the calm in the storm. He knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The recess was supposed to give everyone a chance to collect themselves, but it felt more like a battlefield aftermath. The air in the room buzzed with a tense energy, and lawmakers exchanged hurried whispers in corners, their faces grim. The public was already catching wind of what had transpired, and soon the media would be all over it. The phones in the room buzzed incessantly, with texts and calls from political allies and enemies alike, desperate to know the latest developments. Patel, however, seemed unaffected by the chaos unfolding around him. He sat calmly at the table, reviewing the documents he had presented. He knew that this moment, this very moment, was more than just a victory in a political clash. It was a battle for truth, for transparency, and for the future of a narrative that had been distorted for far too long. He was confident that what had just happened would ripple out into the broader conversation across the country. Meanwhile, across the room, Crockett was visibly shaken. Her confident, defiant posture had collapsed into something resembling defeat. She leaned against the wall, talking quietly to her staff, her face tight with frustration. She had been unprepared for this level of attack. The documents Patel had presented, hard evidence, irrefutable, had torn apart her entire line of defense. "What do we do now?" one of her aides asked, fear creeping into their voice. "He's got us cornered, Jasmine. The media's already running with it." Crockett's jaw clenched, but she quickly masked the unease. She couldn't afford to show weakness. "We can't let this stand," she snapped, her eyes hardening. "We fight back. We start the counter-narrative. This is just another smear campaign. We've been through worse." But deep down, she knew the situation had escalated beyond the usual political sparring. Kash Patel had delivered a message, and it was resonating far beyond the committee room. The American people were watching, and they weren't going to forget what they had just seen. Minutes later, the committee session resumed, and Crockett took her seat, her face a mask of professionalism, though everyone in the room could tell she was reeling. The chair called the session back to order, but the mood had irrevocably shifted. There was a sense of quiet tension that hung in the air, as if everyone was waiting for the next move. Patel stood and cleared his throat, addressing the committee once more. "I've presented the facts, the truth that Congresswoman Crockett would rather ignore. This isn't about politics, this is about national security, about putting the country first. If we allow this kind of gamesmanship to continue, we will be doing a disservice to every American citizen who depends on us to protect them." He turned toward Crockett, his tone cool and collected. "You've made this personal, Congresswoman, and I understand that. But you need to understand this, the truth doesn't care about your political ambitions. It doesn't care about your career. It only cares about the facts." Crockett sat silently, her teeth gritted, but she didn't respond. What more could she say? She had no rebuttal that could counter the force of Patel's evidence. It was as if the room had suddenly realized who held the power in this battle, and it wasn't her. The committee chair, sensing the shift in the room, quickly moved to steer the conversation back on track. "Let's continue. We'll take questions now." But it was clear that the dynamics had changed. The questioning now felt more cautious, almost hesitant, as if the members of the committee were trying to tiptoe around the fallout of the earlier exchange. Patel had exposed the cracks in Crockett's narrative, and even those who had supported her in the past seemed uncertain. For Crockett, this wasn't just a failed hearing, it was a political crisis. Her allies were already distancing themselves, and the public was already beginning to pick sides. A bad story, especially one like this, could be the death of a career. And as the session continued, it became increasingly clear that this was far from over. Patel had played his hand masterfully. He wasn't just a former advisor, he was a force to be reckoned with. And as the hearing drew to a close, there was only one certainty: Kash Patel had won the day. But the real battle was just beginning. The days that followed the committee hearing were a whirlwind of media coverage, political maneuvering, and frantic damage control. The story of Kash Patel's explosive testimony was the talk of Washington, trending across all major news networks and dominating social media. His devastating takedown of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had left the political world stunned, but what was even more remarkable was how swiftly the narrative had shifted. What had started as an intelligence hearing was now being framed as a showdown between an outsider who dared to challenge the establishment and a politician whose credibility was unraveling before the public's eyes. For Patel, it was business as usual. He had prepared for this. He knew that truth, once unleashed, could be a double-edged sword. His media team worked tirelessly, coordinating interviews and press conferences where he continued to press his case, that the country's national security had been compromised by a political agenda, and that people like Crockett had played a dangerous game with the truth. He had his allies, too, high-profile conservative figures and former colleagues who backed him up, reinforcing the legitimacy of the documents he had presented. But for Crockett, the pressure was mounting. Her phone rang off the hook with calls from the Democratic Party's leadership, her consultants, and media outlets looking for a statement. She had been caught in a storm she wasn't ready for, and her every move was being scrutinized. In an attempt to regain some control of the narrative, she went on television, sitting down for an exclusive interview with a prominent political talk show. The cameras flashed, and the host, a seasoned journalist known for tough interviews, wasted no time. "Congresswoman Crockett, many would argue that your career is on the line following Kash Patel's devastating accusations. How do you respond to those who say you've been exposed as playing politics with national security?" Crockett smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. What Kash Patel presented was nothing more than a collection of partisan documents designed to deceive the public, she said, her voice steady but with an edge. "He's trying to paint me as someone I'm not. I've spent my career fighting for the American people, for real change. What he and others like him are doing is nothing more than an attempt to discredit the truth." But the host pressed her further. "But Congresswoman, the evidence Patel showed was compelling. The American public has seen it. The reports he presented show exactly what he's accused you of, coordinating with figures who've put political gain above the country's interests. How do you respond to that?" Crockett's smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "This is nothing more than a smear campaign. I've been on the front lines for years, standing up to the very people who have been manipulating this country. This is an attack on me, yes, but more importantly, it's an attack on the American people who want accountability and transparency." Behind the scenes, her political allies were scrambling. Emergency strategy sessions were being held to decide how best to handle the fallout. Polls were already showing a significant dip in her approval ratings. The damage wasn't just coming from Patel, it was coming from the narrative that had taken hold. Patel's camp wasn't letting up. His social media presence exploded, and he began to release more documents, more damning revelations about the connections between political figures and powerful lobbying groups. The narrative was slowly morphing into something much larger, a battle not just between two people, but a systemic issue of corruption and political manipulation. Back in Washington, the pressure was beginning to show on Crockett. She had gone from being a rising star, a force in the Democratic Party, to a woman fighting to stay afloat in a sea of controversy. She couldn't afford to sit idly by and hope the storm would pass. It was time for a counterattack. She called in her closest allies, people she trusted, to devise a strategy to discredit Patel once and for all. They dug into his past, looking for weaknesses, any mistake he might have made, any controversy they could exploit. They also began to organize rallies, speeches, and television appearances where she could make her case directly to the people. If she was going down, she wasn't going to go quietly. But Patel, for his part, wasn't intimidated. He knew that the best defense was a good offense, and he wasn't about to let Crockett have the last word. He had already begun rallying his own supporters, people who had been quietly backing him for years, and now, they were ready to fight alongside him. The momentum was on his side, and he was determined to ride it. As the battle lines were drawn, the American public was about to witness something they hadn't seen in a long time, a high-stakes political war, one that would test the very fabric of trust in Washington. The game was on. The political climate had reached a boiling point. After weeks of back and forth, television appearances, and counter-narratives, the time for talk was coming to an end. The media had been all over the story, dissecting every word, every action, every document. Both Kash Patel and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had rallied their supporters, making their cases in interviews and speeches. But now, it was time for the grand finale, an all-important televised debate between the two of them, to take place in front of the nation. The debate was set to be the political event of the year. The stakes had never been higher, and the expectations were through the roof. Crockett, after weeks of preparation, entered the debate hall with a determined, almost desperate look in her eyes. She knew this was her last chance to regain control of the narrative. The pressure was immense. If she could land a blow on Patel in this debate, she might just be able to turn the tide. But if she faltered, it could be the end of her career. Patel, on the other hand, walked into the hall with the calm confidence of someone who had already won. His team had been working tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure his performance would be flawless. He had the facts on his side, and he knew that the American people were watching closely. This wasn't just a debate, it was the culmination of everything he had fought for. As the debate began, the moderator laid out the ground rules. Each candidate would have 2 minutes for opening statements, followed by a series of questions from the audience and closing remarks. Patel went first. "My fellow Americans," he began, his voice steady and commanding, "we are at a crossroads. For far too long, we have watched as those in power played games with our security, our safety, and our future. What you saw in that hearing, the evidence I presented, is just the tip of the iceberg. The truth is out there, and it's time to confront it." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "Congresswoman Crockett and her allies have spent years obstructing the truth, hiding behind political games. The American people deserve better. They deserve honesty, accountability, and above all, they deserve leaders who will put their interests first." The crowd was quiet, absorbing Patel's words. His opening statement had been calculated, direct, and forceful. Crockett, for her part, was visibly tense, but she wasn't about to let him dominate the stage. She stepped forward when it was her turn. "Mr. Patel likes to talk about the truth, but let's be clear, his truth is a manufactured version designed to manipulate the American people. The documents he presented were nothing more than partisan hacks trying to rewrite history. I've spent my career standing up to corruption, to injustice, and I won't let anyone, not even Kash Patel, rewrite my legacy or the truth about what I've done for this country." Her voice was fiery, but there was a noticeable strain to it. The words felt rehearsed, as if she was trying to convince herself as much as the audience. The crowd's reaction was mixed, but there was no denying the pressure she was under. The debate quickly became a back and forth between the two, with Patel continuing to hammer home the points he had made in the committee hearing. He cited more documents, more pieces of evidence, each one more damning than the last. Every time Crockett attempted to respond, he shut her down with cold, calculated logic. "You can call it a smear campaign, Congresswoman, but these are the facts. These are the documents that tell the real story. Your narrative, built on lies, is crumbling," Patel said, looking directly at her, a sharp edge to his voice. Crockett, now visibly shaken, tried to regain control. "This is exactly what he does, use intimidation, fear, and distraction. The American people won't be swayed by his theatrics. They know that I've fought for them, for justice. I will not be bullied." But the audience could see the cracks beginning to show. Patel had the upper hand. His evidence was too strong, his argument too airtight. Crockett's rebuttals were losing their sting, and her confidence was eroding by the minute. The room could feel it. Kash Patel wasn't just winning the debate, he was winning the war. In the final moments of the debate, the moderator gave each candidate one last chance to speak. Patel stood up straight, looked directly into the camera, and delivered a final, powerful statement. "America deserves leadership that is grounded in truth, not politics. I'm not here to play games. I'm here to make sure that the future of this nation is built on integrity and transparency. Congresswoman Crockett and her allies can try to twist the narrative, but the truth is undeniable. And I will keep fighting until the American people get what they deserve." Crockett stood, her eyes flashing with defiance, but it was clear the wind had been taken out of her sails. She had no rebuttal that could match Patel's words. She gave a tight, forced smile, then spoke one last time. "I will continue to fight for the American people, no matter what Mr. Patel or anyone else says. The truth will prevail." But as the debate ended, it was obvious that the battle had already been won. The media coverage the following day was dominated by Patel's performance. Headlines everywhere proclaimed the same thing: Patel dominates Crockett in final showdown. By the end of the week, Crockett's approval ratings had tanked. The public perception of her had shifted irreparably. She attempted to salvage her career, but the damage was done. Her political enemies were already calling for her resignation, and her allies were quietly distancing themselves. The circus was over. Patel, meanwhile, emerged as a political force to be reckoned with. He had made his mark on the national stage, and the road ahead was wide open. His victory wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a statement about the power of truth in the face of political manipulation. And in the end, it was clear that no amount of spin could undo what had been exposed. For Kash Patel, this was just the beginning. But for Jasmine Crockett, the end had come.